Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, mounting casualties and international sanctions mark the first week of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A second round of talks have opened humanitarian corridors. But what comes next? The goal of reaching carbon neutrality is among the most watched topics at this year's annual sessions of China's top legislature and political advisory body. What challenges lie ahead? Now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Fu Chengdu. The war in Ukraine is now more than a week old. The second round of talks has concluded and more sanctions are being placed on Russia by the West. To better understand the situation on the ground, both military and political, I'm joined by Russian defense analyst Pavel Felgenhauer, Professor Jove Toker of the American Graduate School in Paris, and Atul Aneja, editor of Indian Narrative. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. So, Pavel, I will start with you. Let's take a look at on the situation on the ground. It seems that Russian forces expected to finish their military operation quickly, decisively, but that hasn't happened. And the war now shows little signs of ending soon. But President Putin said everything is going on according to the schedule. Do you agree with him?
Well, the president said that everything's on plan, everything's on schedule. Well, maybe that was, of course, a bit of a stretching it, though sources from the Kremlin from the very beginning were saying that the operation was foreseen for 2 weeks. Now we're in the second week, so they can say it's still a bit on schedule because frame has not elapsed. Again, this is a big country, and there's two actually, or maybe even three, or at least two separate operations happening in the east, in the south, and in the north. And in the south, the progress has been steady, but everyone's focused, of course, on the capital, on Kiev, and apparently there have been serious hiccups. And the Russian forces there that moved to the northwest of Kiev to cut it off, begin maybe a siege, seem to have been a bit stranded, maybe already by the by the thaw that turned the fields into mud bogs where even tanks get stuck, so they can't spread out. They are stuck there a bit, though they are still Russia anyway has the initiative on all fronts. The Ukrainians are just pushing back, sometimes counterattacking, but mostly in a totally defensive mood. Mm-hmm. So that means Russia is still very much on the, if not on the schedule, at least it's on the operation, and apparently hopes to, as Putin said, the objectives will be met no matter what. Mm-hmm. But this may drag on because the coming several weeks would be the Rasputitsa, the spring mud season, and that could hamper Russian operations, especially in the north.
Atul, from India, if you look at the situation now, they have concluded the second round of discussion, and it's good to see that they agreed upon the establishment of a humanitarian corridor. Do you think that kind of agreement will lead to something, let's say, lead to de-escalation of the warfare there?
Too early to say, Chengdu, but from an Indian perspective, this is very, very important because we have a large number of students who have been trapped in the war zone. And while the evacuation is taking place further through Romania and Poland, and Hungary, but there are students closer to the war zone near Donbass who have to be evacuated, and they are living in bunkers. So if you have a humanitarian corridor established, then from that particular problem is likely to get largely solved. Now your second point, whether it's going to lead to a larger de-escalation, it's probable that it would lead to, because if you see the statement coming out of that meeting which took place in Belarus yesterday, it does say that there are a number of common points which have emerged even on combat issues. And I think President Zelensky of Ukraine has also mentioned about neutrality as a possible option worth discussion. And that is one of the key demands which is coming from Moscow. And if you can work around that, that's a very major point on which we can have a further advance and which can lead to the possibility of further de-escalation. So there are hopeful signs. Too early to say, but these are good signs which are coming out. But we'll have to wait and see.
Yes, finally something positive and also more hopeful.
Yeah.
Professor Toker, Ukraine is now asking NATO to set a no-fly zone to fight against Russia, but the NATO and also the US, they are very hesitant, basically said no. But with this more and more media coverage, probably there are more support, let's say, coming from the public. Will that somehow probably impact this political atmosphere, and that may even change the mindset of the leaders, NATO leaders and U.S. Government over there?
I doubt it. I doubt it, and I would have liked to join my colleague in New Delhi in tracing down some optimistic, positive signs. I'm afraid I don't see any, or the ones we see, let's see, over the negotiation table, and in a way, somewhere on the terrain, some spots on the terrain. I'm afraid that that's too weak and too shaky in relation, in proportion to what the overall situation is and what the overall war situation, military situation is on the ground. Now, media contribution indeed in its way with this modern digital media new phenomena which we haven't known yet all over the place to such extent over such dimensions in previous conflicts in other parts of the world. They actually, how should I say, they are horizontalizing media input into public opinion's consciousness. Namely, there are more media outlets, there is more information and more bits and pieces that are there for public opinions all over the world to digest on. But are they going to be useful when it comes to political, strategic and military moves? I don't think so. I think that it may contribute to more confusion, but not necessarily to more efficiency in terms of trying to be constructive and let the conflict be as short, as less deadly as possible.
Well, Pavel, we are seeing that, in particular, probably in European countries, along with the sanctions, Russian businesses and Russian individuals are being targeted. Sometimes musicians, athletes, artists, or even Russian cats, are singled out, and they are under pressure. Will such kind of, I would call it cancel Russia, like a cancel Russia campaign, will that produce actually more unity, around the Russian government? People would say, these sanctions are not targeting the government or the politicians, they are targeting Russia.
Well, that's what the government is sort of saying, and many in Russia actually believe that this is wrong, that the United States, they've been blaming mostly the United States, is targeting Russia, and it's for no good reason. But, well, that's how the situation is right now. I'm an old-timer. I remember the Vietnam War, when the Americans were seen as the culprits in many parts of the world, and the public opinion in the world was actually anti-American. But the ruling elites, at least in the West, believed that they needed America anyway. And so it was a split there. Right now, there's no split. The public opinion in the world, actually, if you see the results of the General Assembly vote, is rather anti-Russian, and the elites in the West are anti-Russian, and so it's all kind of joined together, and that means that there are sanctions coming from the government, there are sanctions coming from the public, from business, who do make kind of moves quite often ahead of the government's doing it. So that's what Russia is right now facing, and apparently not many were not, it was not fully ready for such an onslaught of sanctions and penalties. And that's a serious problem right now.
Right. Professor Toker, briefly, Do you think European countries, they are concerned that I mean, the pressures like that, sometimes individual Russians will be singled out to basically denounce Putin himself publicly, things like that, or even passengers somehow becoming a problem, like in Canada for the flight, things like that. Do you think that will produce maybe this opposite effects? If you look at the sanctions, they want to basically stand with the Russian people against the Russian government, but now maybe it's the opposite effect there.
Yeah, and even beyond that, some of the observers and commentators in Europe, in Germany, in Britain, in France, in Italy, believe that the appreciation according to which if you hit the oligarch, if you hit the wealthy businessmen and women around Putin, which is in a way enabling him to exercise such power in Moscow, all this analysis is based on rather wrong appreciation, because these are not the oligarch in Moscow who enable Putin to rule with no, say, counter-criticism. It's rather the other way around. It's Putin who permits, in the overall political atmosphere and reality which he has created over 20 years of centralized power in Moscow, he is the one who enables the oligarch to exercise such influence and to gather that much wealth. So many actually put a lot of question marks as to the efficiency of those sanctions. Let them be personalized, not to speak about the ones which unfortunately will hurt Russian population at large.
Yes, indeed. We see that both China and India, the two large countries, they abstained on a couple of resolutions against Russia. They have their probably own understanding, own consideration. For China, it's they understand the Russia's security concern, but at the same time they know the invasion probably is wrong here, mistake. Both of the countries, China, India, are criticized. So what's India's political consideration behind its stance?
Well, it's on several levels, Chengdu. The first thing is that there is a deep historical relationship between India and Russia, earlier with the former Soviet Union. And our own experience with the Russians has been that they prove to be reliable partners at whatever stage there is. So there is that element of trust which is there with the Russians, and that is historically driven. The second thing is some very pragmatic and practical reasons are there. A large chunk of Indian armed forces use Russian weaponry. And if India turns against Russia, Russia has tremendous leverage against India. And that is something which persuades us, because it's in our national interest, to continue a very strong partnership with Russia. And we also have right now, in a very practical way, there are students out there in thousands in that zone. And suppose India were to vote against Russia at this time, that may adversely impact their personal safety and have deep political repercussions back home. So there are several layers of why India is sort of playing a neutral role. We do agree that perhaps, in fact, that's the position, that ultimately you have to go for dialogue and diplomacy as a way forward. And that has been the position either in the General Assembly or in the UN Security Council.
Yes.
And to resolve this diplomatically and peacefully.
Right.
President Putin and Prime Minister Modi, has even day before yesterday, held a telephone conversation. There's a very active dialogue which is going on. We want this to end, but we are not unnecessarily villainizing Russia for the reasons which I've said.
Well, actually, on the internet, there's a strong voice among some Indian netizens, supporting Russia by using hashtag, such as "Stand with Putin." Is that kind of opinion popular, and what they are thinking about that?
I think that's very significant, and I think that goes much deeper in the Indian psyche. Our fight against colonialism and with the British, etc., and then their successes. So there is that undercurrent which is there among the Indians. It's among people to people. I mean, it's just at the popular level. It has not gone, despite a rapid improvement of our relations with the United States and the West in general. So I do think that there is a very strong opinion in India, which is not intuitively in favor of the West, especially the Americans. So that's number one. Second thing is doctrinally, I think from 1998, India has declared its strategic autonomy, and I think that doctrine remains, that it is free to engage with all the countries, be it the United States in the Indo-Pacific or Japan, or in Eurasia with the Russians. And in fact, the India-China track at one time has soured now, but that was also moving forward. That we have this strategic autonomy, and we will engage everyone so long as that engagement promotes India's national interests. There is an independent foreign policy which is guiding the positions which India is taking towards this conflict, and this position of abstaining at the UN and elsewhere, despite all the pressures. And I can tell you, Chengdu, there are enormous pressures which are coming on India right now,
in particular from the West,
from the United States.
From the United States.
And
yes.
yesterday we had this conference of the Quad. I don't have a readout on that, but I don't think there was convergence on everything out there.
Yes, thank you, gentlemen. No doubt we'll be talking more about the crisis. And coming up next is an exclusive interview with Fu Chengdu, a Cheung Graduate School of Business and founder of Carbon Neutrality International Academy. Stay with us. Thank you, Professor Fu. Thank you for joining us. Since we are going to talk about this balance between economic growth and also the fight against the climate change, so let's start with the Chinese economic growth. How do you describe the prospect for Chinese economy in the year 2022?
Thank you, Chengdu. And talking about the economics, especially at the beginning of the 2 months of the year, and it seems quite encouraging and compare with the fourth quarter of last year. And you know, the fourth quarter last year's economic performance and did deliver some concerns. And as we commonly understand that the government mentioned 3 challenges that are ahead of us, and we are expecting that we can stop the economic slowdown at that trend. But the first 2 months of this year seems a lot better than we expected. And this is not just only from the value-added industrial figures and from the service sector growth and the fixed investment in the fixed assets and the utilization of power growth and the freight volumes and PPI, CPI seems a lot better than we expected at the end of last year. And, you know, we are expecting that just next few days, the government policy and the measures and also the plans for this year will come out. I think there will be more real policies will be applied in this year's economic growth.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's move on to the energy sector. You once said that China should regard energy independence as a strategic goal. How do you think China should achieve energy independence, of course, ensure energy security in that respect?
China is a very unique country in the world. It's not just because our political system is unique, and also because of so large in population. And 1.4 billion people, you know, they require the almost 50% of total world energy, if you consider the future economic growth. So how the world can support you? And so independence is first priority for China's safety growth or sustainable growth. And second, if we want to be security, on energy security, we must be energy independent. How we can achieve this? I think with the recent economic, the technology progress, especially with the green energy like solar or wind technology progress, I think we are able to make this country energy independent. For example, while we are achieving the carbon neutrality, we will have a lot of faster progress. Evidence will be seen in the future years that the green energy will become one of the major energy sector to China, with affordable price to most of the people. So, and with the current remaining of the fossil fuels, I think we can, within 10 years, we can make the total energy supply from ourselves, including fossil fuels and the green energy, will be 70%. If with the 70% of total energy from our own, we are relatively independent.
Obviously, for not only these energy companies, oil and gas companies, but also for all probably the entire business community, when they look at the China's two goals, we say of peaking the emission in 2030 and achieving carbon neutrality in 2060. What do the two goals mean to the companies? What kind of opportunities or challenges that kind of goals will probably bring about for them?
They actually, when we talk about peaking 2030 or the neutrality 2060, actually this is not just a government job. This is a business job, especially energy companies' job. How they can make this become reality must be their company's strategy. If they build this strategy into their strategy, I think a lot better results and can be achieved better than we expected can be achieved. First one, business must understand how much CO2 you discharge, how CO2 is discharged. Majority of the business company in China do not know this. So this we need to make sure that we start to make understanding how much our how much wealth we have or how CO2 we have. This need independent company like survey or auditing. So starting from auditing how much CO2 you discharge, how you discharge, and then second step, you need to, based on the CO2 you have and what kind of technology you need to use to upgrade your facilities. And third one, after you have the facility upgraded and you need auditing again. With this last auditing, you know how much CO2 you saved or you did not discharge. And then based on this, those saved CO2 you can sell to the market. And the current way is not marketing way. It's a government gave the company, so give you a quota. This is some CO2 you have to save this year. I think this is not good way. This is the government managers way. We must using market way. Mm-hmm. So with the market way, and the company will have their own enthusiastic methods because they want to turn the CO2 from the harm things to assets. And once we do this, actually we have to use new technology. We are upgrading our facilities, our systems. We are transforming company from traditional to a high-tech company.
Then it's, of course, not only individual companies, but also the overall goal and target of China 2030, 2060, carbon neutrality. People are talking about this balance for the Chinese government. On one hand, as a developing country, you want a continuous economic growth. At the same time, you want to reduce the carbon emission. How can we achieve this kind of a balance?
We should have one and integrated policy and an integrated plan for all the districts, all the provinces, and all the business sectors. And second, we need to make sure which part that we cut CO2 with less cost. For those areas who cut 1/10 of CO2, pay a higher cost, we'll let them do later. We give them opportunity to, one, promote the energy efficiency, second, applying CCUS methods, even though we are using a lot of more like a coal in next 10 years before we peak. And we can reduce CO2 discharge. So this is not same issue. And a lot of people thinking, if I burn more coal, I must discharge more CO2. No. We can reduce discharge of CO2, but we have to spend our efforts and the investment on and R&D on this energy efficiency and CCUS.
And from China to the international situation here, China last year announced that they will not build new overseas coal power projects. I mean, how impactful that will be in terms of global efforts against climate change?
If you look at the developed countries, majority of the developed countries, when they want to develop the energy, they must use their own resources. Most of those countries with resources of fossil fuels, including coal and oil and gas. So building those coal burning power plant, it's not China want to build. It's the country that own their resources, they want to build that. So China only provide the help in technology side and also part of the investment. So when China do not support this, and I think this might help the developing countries rethinking how to use the green energies. But one of the challenges to them, they are not developed countries. They need technology, they need financing, but the developed countries have committed $100 billion each year in the last 10 years, but none of them happened. So one thing you want them to discharge less CO2, and second, you do not support them for the fossil fuels. So you have to select. Or either you finance them, help them in financing, or provide technology, or let them to continue their life. So you mentioned every government must achieve a balance of the economic growth targets. We at the climate change area is the same. We need to have a balanced goal. Balanced goal, carbon neutrality, economic growth, people's lives are improving, and energy affordability. Those must be balanced. This is not a simple issue. This is always with the people's life. If you forget the people's life and their quality of the people's life improvement and the affordability of any energy supplied to them, it cannot be sustainable.
Well, that's my interview with Fu Chengdu, former chairman of SINOPEC. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.